Imagine a battle raging across a war-torn land. The Israelite forces, outnumbered and oppressed, struggle against a ruthless enemy. Victory seems uncertain, but then, a single woman steps into history, armed with nothing more than courage and an unexpected weapon. Jael, a seemingly ordinary woman, does the extraordinary. She ends a war with one decisive strike. This is her story, a tale of bravery, deception, and divine justice. Welcome to Mindful Musing, a journey with God, where faith comes alive, and every story reminds us that the God of yesterday is still the God of today. Here, we dive deep into the untold wonders of Scripture, immersive, emotional, powerful. Stories that stir your spirit, ignite your faith, and draw you closer to the heart of God. Subscribe now and join the journey, as we step into one of the most astonishing moments in all of biblical history. The sun burned fiercely over the land of Canaan, casting its golden rays upon a nation in despair. Israel, once strong, now lived under the iron grip of King Jabin. His reign was ruthless, marked by relentless oppression and endless suffering for God's people. The fear of his army, led by Sisera, echoed through every village, every home, and every heart. It had been 20 years since the Israelites had last known peace, 2 decades of kneeling under the rule of an enemy who seemed unstoppable. Sisera, the commander of Jabin's forces, was a man of cruelty and dominance. His name alone sent shivers through the Israelites. He ruled with 900 iron chariots, an army so fearsome that no force in Israel could stand against him. Whenever he rode into battle, dust clouds followed his wheels, and terrified villagers ran for cover. He had no mercy, no fear of God, and no reason to believe his reign would end. The Israelites suffered in silence. Their crops were stolen, their homes raided, their sons forced into servitude under the brutal weight of Sisera's power. There was no resistance, only cries for deliverance that seemed unanswered. The mighty warriors of Israel had long abandoned any attempt to rebel. To fight Sisera was to invite death. Hope had faded, and God's people whispered among themselves, wondering if he had truly abandoned them. But while Sisera ruled in arrogance, God was preparing his response. A deliverance unlike any Israel had ever seen. The answer would not come from the battlefield, nor from a king, nor from an army of thousands. It would come from an unexpected place, a woman, a tent, and a single strike. Every oppressor has his day of reckoning. The Israelites had suffered for too long, and their cries for help had reached the heavens. Though silent for years, their prayers began to stir the heart of the Almighty. And his answer came through a woman who held the mantle of leadership, Deborah, the prophetess. Unlike other leaders in Israel, Deborah did not command armies. She did not wield a sword, nor did she march into war. Her strength lay in wisdom, her power in prophecy, her authority in God. She sat beneath a palm tree, where men and women came to seek guidance. Her words carried the weight of divine truth, and she knew, without a shadow of doubt, that Israel's suffering was about to end. One day, God spoke to Deborah in a vision, "Rise up, for I have chosen a man who will lead Israel into victory." The name was given. Barak. Barak was a warrior, strong and fearless, yet hesitant to step into battle against Sisera. He knew the odds. He had seen Sisera's chariots. To go to war against him without a divine sign was suicide. But Deborah's word struck his heart. This was not just a battle of armies, it was a battle of faith. "If you go with me, I will go," Barak told Deborah. He would fight, but only if the prophetess herself stood by his side. Deborah agreed, but she warned him, "The glory of this battle will not be yours, but in the hands of a woman." It was a prophecy that made little sense at the time. A woman? What woman would slay a commander in battle? But the words had been spoken. God had already set his plan in motion. Word spread quickly. The battle was coming. Israel was no longer silent, no longer afraid. Barak gathered his army, 10,000 men, ready to march. They climbed Mount Tabor, waiting for God's sign. And then, the moment came. Sisera's spies reported Israel's movement, and the commander laughed. The Israelites were preparing for war. Foolish. He had 900 iron chariots, legions of warriors, and years of domination over these weak people. He saw no threat, no challenge, no reason to fear defeat. With his confidence overflowing, Sisera launched his attack. His army rushed toward Israel, their chariots rolling with unstoppable force. The earth trembled beneath them. It should have been a slaughter. But then, the heavens moved. Out of nowhere, thunder rumbled. Clouds swarmed the sky, dark as death. And then came the storm. Rain poured like fire, filling the river Kishon, turning soil into mud, drowning Sisera's chariots in thick, sinking earth. The unstoppable force became immobile. His warriors, panicked. His army, scattered. Israel surged forward. Barak led the charge, crushing Sisera's forces, striking down warriors left and right. It was divine intervention. God himself had fought for Israel. The victory was certain, but one last enemy remained. Sisera himself had escaped. The once mighty commander, bloodied and drenched from the storm, ran for his life. No chariots, no army, no hope. His once unshakable arrogance had crumbled, leaving him as nothing more than a desperate fugitive. He searched frantically for shelter, somewhere to hide, somewhere safe. And then, he saw a tent. He knew this place. The house of Heber the Kenite was neutral territory. Not Israelite. Not an enemy. Surely, he would find refuge here. Surely, he would be safe. Jael, standing at the entrance, watched as Sisera approached. Her eyes narrowed, but her face betrayed nothing. She welcomed him. She offered him shelter. A warm smile. A soft voice. A clever deception. Sisera collapsed inside, exhausted. He believed he was safe. He was wrong. In the quiet of the tent, history was about to change. Jael was no soldier, no warrior, no prophet. Yet, her moment had come. Her name would be written into eternity because of what she was about to do. The oppressor of Israel had entered her tent. He would never leave it alive. The battle had been fought, but true victory was yet to come. Israel had won the war, but Sisera still lived. That would soon change. God had fulfilled his promise. The honor of victory would not go to Barak. It would go to a woman. Jael held history in her hands. The moment of deliverance had arrived. And with one decisive strike, Israel would finally be free. The land of Israel trembled with anticipation. The echoes of oppression still hung in the air, but something was shifting, a force unseen, yet undeniable. The long years of suffering under King Jabin's rule and Sisera's merciless army were drawing to an end. God had spoken, and deliverance was near. At the heart of Israel's turning point stood Deborah, a prophetess whose wisdom cut through doubt, a judge whose leadership demanded courage. She had heard the cries of her people, had seen the devastation of Sisera's iron chariots, and had waited for God's command. Now, at last, the answer had come. She sent for Barak. Barak of Kadesh was no stranger to battle. He had wielded a sword against invaders before, had led men in defense of Israel's land. But the thought of facing Sisera, the undefeated commander of the enemy forces, was a weight even he could not bear easily. When Deborah summoned him, he arrived with the burden of uncertainty in his heart. He was a warrior, yes. But he had seen firsthand Sisera's ruthless power. The man commanded 900 iron chariots, unstoppable machines that crushed everything in their path. What could Israel possibly do against such a force? Deborah did not hesitate. The words she spoke were not her own, they came directly from the Lord. Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, she declared, her voice unwavering. Gather 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun, and go to Mount Tabor. Sisera and his army will come against you, but God will give them into your hands. Barak listened, but his doubts remained. How could he face Sisera alone? If victory were certain, why had Israel suffered for 20 years? Why did God now command war when before he had been silent? What if Deborah was wrong? He did not refuse the call, but neither did he accept it fully. His response was hesitant, almost fearful. If you go with me, I will go, he told Deborah. But if you do not go with me, I will not go. It was not a lack of skill that held him back, it was a lack of faith. Deborah knew victory was coming, but Barak's uncertainty would cost him honor. She gave him a prophecy that would reshape the outcome of the battle. Very well, I will go with you, she replied. But because you have relied on me, the victory will not be yours. The Lord will give Sisera into the hands of a woman. A woman? It was an unexpected prophecy. How could a woman defeat Sisera, the warlord of Canaan? Barak did not dwell on the meaning. The battle was coming, and he had to prepare. At Deborah's command, Barak summoned warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun, two of Israel's northern tribes. 10,000 men answered the call, a force small compared to Sisera's army, but one driven by desperation and divine command. Mount Tabor became their fortress. High above the battlefield, they waited, swords sharpened, shields raised. This was Israel's last stand. Word of Israel's uprising reached Sisera quickly. To him, it was laughable. An army of 10,000. Against him, the commander of Canaan, the leader of the most feared war chariots in the land. It was nothing. A joke. His confidence swelled as he summoned his forces. 900 iron chariots, thousands of warriors, a force so powerful it had crushed every enemy before. He would crush Israel next. Sisera's army stormed toward the valley, their chariots rolling like thunder over the earth. Barak's forces stood atop Mount Tabor, watching as the unstoppable force of Sisera approached. A moment of silence before war erupted. And then, Deborah spoke. Go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Barak charged down the mountain with his 10,000 men. Swords clashed, shields shattered, battle cries rang through the valley. Israel fought with everything they had, but the iron chariots of Sisera pushed forward, crushing warriors beneath their wheels. It should have been a slaughter. But then, God moved. The sky darkened. Winds roared over the battlefield. Rain poured in torrents, flooding the river Kishon at the base of the valley. The dry, firm ground turned into mud. Thick, heavy, impossible mud. Sisera's unstoppable chariots, his greatest weapon, became his downfall. The wheels sank, trapped in the thick, wet earth. Soldiers screamed as their war machines became useless. Some tried to flee, others fell before Israel's advancing forces. Sisera himself saw the disaster unfold. This was no ordinary storm. This was divine intervention. And as Sisera watched his army crumble, he realized the truth: he had lost. Sisera's desperate escape. The once mighty commander abandoned his chariot, slipping into the chaos unnoticed. His army was doomed. The Israelites were pushing forward, cutting through his forces, hunting down his warriors. He had no choice. He ran. Through mud, through blood, through the sounds of battle and dying men, he ran. He knew he couldn't return to King Jabin, not after a defeat like this. His only hope was to hide, to vanish, to survive. In the distance, he saw a lone tent standing in the wilderness. A place of refuge. Jael's tent. The battle had been fought, the war nearly won. Israel, once crippled in fear, had routed Sisera's forces, had shattered the strength of their oppressors. The cries of the Israelites had been answered. But true victory was yet to come. A woman would deal the final blow. Sisera had escaped, but he had run straight into the hands of Jael. She was waiting. And soon, the prophecy would be fulfilled. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered chariots and fallen warriors. The once mighty army of Sisera, the commander who had terrorized Israel for 2 decades, was no more. His 900 iron chariots, once symbols of unstoppable power, lay abandoned in the mud, their wheels useless, their soldiers broken. The storm had come without warning, the earth had betrayed him, and the God of Israel had turned his greatest strength into his downfall. Victory was certain for the Israelites. Deborah's prophecy had come to pass, and Barak had driven Sisera's forces into the dust. But there was one loose thread, one final enemy who still drew breath. Sisera himself. The commander had fled the chaos, his once polished armor streaked with dirt and blood. He had always been a warrior of strategy rather than brute strength. He knew when to stand his ground, but he also knew when to run. And now, in the wake of his greatest humiliation, he ran for his life. Sisera sprinted through the wilderness, his mind racing faster than his feet. He had lost everything. His army was gone, his forces scattered, and his reputation, shattered. There was no returning to King Jabin in defeat. A broken commander was a worthless commander, and Sisera would rather die than face his ruler with the news that Israel had won. His chest burned from exertion, but he pressed forward. His survival now depended on finding shelter. Somewhere to hide, somewhere safe. Somewhere unknown to Barak and his men. Ahead, a tent stood alone in the distance. He recognized it instantly, the tent of Heber the Kenite. Heber was not an Israelite. He was neutral. Unlike the warriors of Israel, Heber's people were nomads, dwelling in tents, far removed from the conflicts of nations. Sisera believed this neutrality meant safety. Heber had not joined Israel's rebellion, so surely his household would offer a hiding place for the fallen commander. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled toward the entrance, his limbs trembling with exhaustion. He was barely standing, barely thinking. All he knew was that he needed refuge. And then, Jael stepped forward. Jael stood at the entrance of her tent, watching the defeated warlord approach. She had seen the battle unfold. She knew Sisera's army had fallen. She knew Israel had won. And now, the mighty commander had arrived at her doorstep, alone. She offered him a smile. Not forced, not insincere. It was calculated. "Come, my lord," she said, her voice smooth, reassuring. "Do not be afraid. Come into my tent, and I will take care of you." Sisera did not hesitate. He had no reason to suspect danger. Heber's neutrality meant safety, and Jael's welcoming tone convinced him that he was in no immediate threat. He entered the tent, his body collapsing onto the soft fabric of the floor. His mind still raced, but relief washed over him. He had found shelter. He was safe. Or so he thought. "Give me some water," Sisera gasped, his throat dry from exertion. Jael obliged, but instead of water, she gave him milk. It was a small act, seemingly harmless, yet filled with silent deception. Milk was heavier than water, it would soothe him, calm him, perhaps even lull him into sleep. And it worked. Sisera drank, his breathing slowing. He pulled the blanket over himself, exhaustion gripping his body like a vice. He was confident that he had escaped the wrath of Israel, confident that Jael was no threat. But he wasn't entirely without caution. "Stand at the entrance of the tent," he told her. "If anyone comes looking for me, tell them I am not here." It was his final order, his last attempt to ensure survival. Jael nodded. She agreed. But she knew the truth, Sisera's time was running out. The silence inside the tent was suffocating. Sisera lay under the blanket, drifting toward sleep, the weight of defeat sinking deeper into his bones. He had been a warlord, a commander, a ruler of armies. And now, he was nothing. Jael watched him. Careful. Calculated. Unwavering. The man before her was Israel's oppressor. The commander who had led the charge against her people, who had enslaved and slaughtered the innocent, who had terrorized the land for 20 years. And now, he lay vulnerable. Helpless. Unarmed. The prophecy of Deborah echoed in her mind, the Lord will give Sisera into the hands of a woman. She knew. She was that woman. Without hesitation, she reached for the tool nearest her, a tent peg. A seemingly ordinary object, yet in that moment, it became her weapon. In her other hand, she gripped the hammer. She did not hesitate. Jael moved swiftly. The hammer lifted high, the tent peg poised over Sisera's temple. The moment hung for only a fraction of a second, and then, she struck. The iron slammed downward. The tent peg pierced through flesh and bone, driving deep into the earth beneath him. Sisera never woke. The commander of Jabin's army, the most feared warlord in Israel's history, was dead. By the hand of a woman. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The war was over. And Israel was free. Moments later, footsteps echoed outside the tent. It was Barak, leading his warriors, searching for the commander who had escaped. Jael stepped forward. She was calm, composed. She knew what had been accomplished. Come, she called to Barak, her tone steady. I will show you the man you are looking for. Barak entered, and stopped in his tracks. Before him lay Sisera. Dead. Slain. Finished. But not by Barak's hand. Jael had done what no soldier had, the final blow that sealed Israel's victory. Sisera, the warlord who had ruled for decades, had fallen not to a great warrior, but to an ordinary woman in a simple tent. That day, the Israelites celebrated. Their oppressor was gone. Their freedom was restored. And Deborah sang a song, one that immortalized Jael in Israel's history. Blessed above women shall Jael be, the wife of Heber the Kenite. She put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, and pierced his head, he fell at her feet, lifeless. Jael had gone from an unknown woman in a tent to one of the greatest heroines of Israel. And with one strike, she had changed the course of history. The battlefield was silent now. The iron chariots that once thundered across the valley lay abandoned, sinking into the mud left by the divine storm. The once mighty army of Sisera had been shattered, and Israel's warriors stood victorious, breathing heavily as they looked upon the wreckage. But though the war was won, the enemy commander was missing. Sisera had fled, escaping the blade of Israel's soldiers. He had run from the battlefield, a man desperate to save himself. His pride and dominance were gone, he was no longer a ruler, no longer a general, but a fugitive hunted by God's chosen people. Now, far from the destruction he had orchestrated, he found himself in the wilderness. Alone. Exhausted. Desperate. And then, he saw the tent. A small, solitary structure, standing unthreateningly in the landscape. Jael's tent. Hope flickered in his heart. He recognized the name, Heber the Kenite, the man who had aligned himself with King Jabin. Heber's people were not Israelites, nor were they their sworn enemies. This was neutral ground. Sisera believed that here, at last, he could find safety. He approached swiftly, his breath ragged, his body aching from the escape. And when he reached the entrance, a figure emerged. Jael. She stepped forward, her expression calm, her voice soft, too soft for a moment so charged with fate. Her dark eyes studied the war-weary man before her, the bloodied commander who had slaughtered Israelites for years. And yet, she did not turn him away. Instead, she smiled. Come, my lord. Come right in. Don't be afraid. Her words dripped with welcome, a quiet promise of safety. Sisera sighed, relief washing over him. He had escaped. He was safe now. At least, that's what he believed. Jael stepped aside, allowing Sisera to enter. The dim light inside the tent cast long shadows, the space quiet, peaceful, deceptively so. Sisera collapsed to the ground, exhausted beyond measure. The great warlord, once feared across the land, now lay vulnerable, defenseless. The commander of thousands had become a man grasping for survival. "Please, give me a little water," he whispered. His throat burned, parched from the desperate flight. But Jael did not bring water. She brought milk. A warm, soothing drink, rich and comforting. She poured it into a vessel and handed it to him, and as Sisera drank, his body began to relax. She was taking care of him. She was easing his pain. She covered him with a blanket, shielding him from the cold desert wind. Every movement was gentle, careful, calculated. "Stand at the door of the tent," Sisera murmured, his eyelids heavy. "If anyone comes and asks if I am here, tell them no." Jael nodded. She agreed. And as Sisera, exhausted and unsuspecting, fell asleep, Jael slowly rose to her feet. Her expression did not waver. Her heart did not tremble. Because she knew exactly what she was about to do. The night air whispered against the tent fabric as Jael moved without hesitation. Her fingers found the tools she needed, a hammer, a tent peg. She gripped them tightly, stepping toward the sleeping man who had once commanded armies, who had once held Israel captive under his power. This was the moment foretold. The prophecy had been spoken, Sisera would fall by the hands of a woman. Not by Barak. Not by a warrior of Israel. By her. She knelt beside Sisera, her breath steady, her muscles coiled with precision. He did not stir. He did not suspect. And then, she struck. The hammer slammed down, driving the tent peg deep into Sisera's skull. A single, merciless blow, swift, unrelenting. The enemy of Israel was dead. Jael did not flinch. She stood over the fallen commander, her hands stained with the act of divine justice. She had ended the war without a sword, without an army. A single woman had accomplished what Israel's warriors could not. She had fulfilled the prophecy. Not long after, the sound of rushing footsteps approached the tent. Barak had been chasing Sisera, his soldiers combing the land for the runaway general. And now, the moment of reckoning had arrived. Jael stepped forward to meet him. Her expression was calm, her stance unwavering. "Come," she said. "I will show you the man you are looking for." Barak followed her inside. And there, lying motionless, a tent peg driven through his temple, was Sisera. The war was over. Not by Barak's sword. Not by the hand of Israel's army. But by a single woman, unarmed, unnoticed, yet chosen by God for the final victory. With Sisera dead, the oppression of King Jabin was doomed to collapse. Israel was free. And when news of Jael's act spread, her name was immortalized in praise. Deborah, the prophetess who had spoken of this moment before it came to pass, sang a song, a celebration of Israel's triumph, and an honor for Jael. "Most blessed of women be Jael," the song declared. She crushed his head, she shattered his temple. At her feet, he sank and fell, where he fell, there he lay dead. Jael was no warrior. She was no queen, no ruler, no leader. Yet her name was spoken in reverence for generations to come. In a world where battles were won by men wielding swords, Jael defeated an enemy with a hammer and a nail. She was God's instrument for justice, a woman chosen to fulfill the prophecy that changed Israel's fate forever. And so, the war ended, not with a final clash on the battlefield, but in the silent confines of a tent, where the most feared commander in Canaan met his demise at the hands of a woman. The enemy had fallen. The oppressor was dead. Israel was free. Because Jael took her chance, and made history. The tent was silent. The only sound was Sisera's slow, steady breathing beneath the blanket. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the wilderness. The land, which had witnessed the thunderous roar of war earlier that day, now lay in eerie stillness. The chariots were abandoned, the battlefield littered with fallen warriors. Sisera's army was gone, his reign broken. And yet, the commander himself still lived. Inside the small, dimly lit tent, his fate hung in the balance. Jael stood motionless, watching his chest rise and fall. She knew what had to be done. The war may have been fought on the battlefield, but true victory would be sealed here, in this tent, in this moment, in her hands. The prophecy of Deborah echoed in her mind. The Lord will give Sisera into the hands of a woman. She took a deep breath. And reached for the tent peg. Jael had never wielded a sword. She was not a warrior, nor had she ever stood on a battlefield. She was a woman of the tents, accustomed to daily survival, not sudden acts of war. But today, she would become Israel's unexpected weapon. She did not hesitate. She gripped the iron tent peg with steady fingers, feeling its cold weight against her palm. With her other hand, she reached for the hammer, a tool she had used countless times before, but never like this. This was no battle between armies. This was a single act of justice. Sisera lay still, unaware. Oblivious to the destiny that had already been written. Jael tightened her grip. Her moment had come. She knelt beside him, careful not to wake him. Her heart pounded, but her hands did not shake. This was not murder, this was divine judgment. She raised the hammer. Time slowed. Everything, the years of Israel's oppression, the suffering of the innocent, the blood spilled by Sisera's forces, all led to this moment. And then, she struck. The hammer slammed down, driving the iron peg straight into Sisera's skull. The force of the blow pierced through flesh, through bone, deep into the ground beneath him. His body jerked once. Then, nothing. Silence. Jael stared at him, her breath coming in rapid gasps. It was done. Sisera was dead. The commander who had ruled over Israel's suffering for 20 years, the man who had led unstoppable chariots into battle, who had oppressed, enslaved, and destroyed, was gone. Not by the hand of Barak. Not by the sword of an Israelite warrior. But by a woman. A woman who had never carried a blade, but had executed the judgment of God with a tent peg. The prophecy had been fulfilled. And Jael, a name previously unknown, would now be remembered forever. The heavy footsteps outside the tent signaled the arrival of Barak. He had chased Sisera across the wilderness, determined to deliver the final blow himself. But it was already too late. Jael stepped forward, her expression calm, unshaken. She had accomplished what no Israelite warrior had. "Come," she said, her voice steady. "I will show you the man you are looking for." Barak had led the army, but Jael had sealed Israel's freedom. Word spread quickly. Israel rejoiced. The oppressor was dead. The land that had suffered for 20 years was free from Sisera's reign of terror. And in celebration, Deborah sang a song that immortalized Jael in Israel's history. "Blessed above women shall Jael be, the wife of Heber the Kenite." She put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, and pierced his head, he fell at her feet, lifeless. Jael had been a woman of the tents. But now, she was a woman of victory. Through her boldness, Israel had won. Through her courage, history had changed. And through her one decisive strike, Sisera's reign had ended forever. The story of Jael and Sisera is one of unexpected heroes, divine justice, and courage found in the most unlikely places. She had no sword, no army, no plan for battle. Yet in one moment of decision, she became the hand of deliverance. Her legacy would live on. And Israel would remember her not just as a woman of the tents, but as the woman who ended a war. The silence inside Jael's tent was deafening. The body of Sisera, the once mighty commander of King Jabin's army, lay still, lifeless beneath the heavy blanket that had once given him a false sense of security. His death had come not from a warrior's blade, nor from the battlefield where he had fought countless victories, but by the hands of a woman wielding nothing but a tent peg and a hammer. Outside, the land of Israel was waking to a new dawn, one free from oppression, free from the terror of Sisera's iron chariots. For 20 years, the Israelites had cried out for deliverance, and now their enemy was gone. But before the news of victory could spread, before the celebrations could begin, there was one final step to take. Barak needed proof. The heavy sound of marching footsteps echoed in the distance. Barak, the Israelite commander, had chased Sisera across the wilderness, determined to deliver the final blow himself. He had fought the battle with 10,000 warriors at his side, had seen the storm roll in, had watched the iron chariots sink into the mud, and yet, Sisera had escaped. Or at least, that's what he thought. Jael stepped forward from her tent as Barak approached. She was calm, steady. There was no hesitation in her movements, no fear in her voice. She had already sealed Israel's victory. "Come," she called to Barak. "I will show you the man you are looking for." Barak slowed his march, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Could it be? Could this woman have truly succeeded where warriors had failed? He entered the tent, and stopped in his tracks. Before him lay Sisera. The tent peg, still lodged in his temple, told the full story. There had been no struggle. No fight. No escape. It was over. Victory had been completed, not by him, not by his army, but by Jael. The news spread quickly. From village to village, from tribe to tribe, the Israelites rejoiced. The women who had once wept over lost sons, husbands, and brothers now danced in celebration. The farmers who had suffered under Sisera's plundering now looked toward a future where their land would be their own once again. The warriors who had feared the iron chariots now marched with heads held high, knowing that Israel's enemy had fallen. God had delivered them. Not through brute strength. Not through military strategy. But through divine intervention, and through one woman's courage. With Sisera dead and King Jabin's power broken, Deborah raised her voice in song, composing one of the most famous hymns of victory ever recorded. Blessed above women shall Jael be, the wife of Heber the Kenite. She put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, and pierced his head, he fell at her feet, lifeless. The words were powerful, immortalizing Jael's moment of triumph, ensuring that generations would remember her not as an ordinary woman, but as Israel's deliverer. She had taken no sword into battle, but her single act had accomplished what armies could not. She had brought an end to the war with one strike, and in doing so, she had changed the course of Israel's future. Though the Israelites had won the battle, the war was not entirely over. King Jabin, Sisera's master, still sat on his throne, unaware that his kingdom was already crumbling beneath him. When word reached him that Sisera had been slain, the reality of his downfall became clear. His greatest weapon, his commander, was gone. His kingdom had lost its grip over Israel, his enemies were celebrating, and soon, his reign would follow Sisera's fate. The Israelites, strengthened by the victory of Barak, Deborah, and Jael, pressed their advantage. City by city, stronghold by stronghold, they broke Jabin's rule. And in time, his kingdom fell entirely. Israel was free. Jael had no reason to be remembered before this moment. She had been a simple woman living in a tent, distant from the affairs of kings and commanders. But her one act of courage had changed history, securing her place in Israel's legacy forever. Through her boldness, Israel had won. Through her cunning, an oppressor had been struck down. And through her fearlessness, she became one of the most celebrated women in Scripture. She was not a soldier. She was not a prophet. She was not a ruler. Yet her name would live on, not as just another woman in Israel's history, but as the woman who ended a war. The story of Jael and Sisera is more than just a tale of battle, it is a testament to how God works through unexpected heroes. She had no army, but she won a war. She had no sword, but she sealed a victory. She had no rank, yet she achieved what warriors could not. Jael's act was swift, decisive, and legendary. Her name would be remembered, her courage never forgotten. And Israel, once a nation in chains, was finally free. Final thoughts. This 1,000-word chapter 6 captures the intensity of Sisera's death, the celebration of Israel, Deborah's victory song, and the fall of King Jabin. The narrative highlights Jael's legacy and how her unexpected act of courage became a defining moment in Israel's history. Would you like any refinements or expansions on specific themes? The story of Jael and Sisera is more than a historical account of war, it is a testament to courage, wisdom, and divine intervention. It is a reminder that victory does not always come from the strongest army, the sharpest sword, or the greatest warrior. Instead, sometimes, it comes from an unlikely hero, from a single defining moment, from an act of bravery that defies expectations. Jael was not a soldier. She was not a prophet. She was not a ruler. Yet, she became one of Israel's greatest legends. Her story holds timeless lessons that still resonate today, shaping how we view leadership, faith, and divine justice. When Sisera fled the battlefield, no one expected a woman living in a tent to be the one who would deliver the final blow to Israel's oppressor. Warriors like Barak had led the charge, soldiers had fought with swords, yet it was Jael's single act of bravery that ended the war. This teaches us that heroism is not confined to the battlefield. True courage is often found in unexpected places, through ordinary people who rise to extraordinary challenges. Whether in war or everyday life, the lesson remains the same. Courage is not about status, it's about action. Throughout the Bible, God chooses unlikely individuals to fulfill his plans. David, a young shepherd boy, defeated Goliath with a single stone. Moses, a man who feared public speaking, led Israel out of Egypt. Gideon, a man full of doubt, became the leader of a victorious army. And now, Jael, an ordinary woman, changed the course of Israel's history. The lesson here is clear: God does not look at human qualifications, he looks at faithfulness. Jael's moment of decisiveness and boldness made her a vessel for divine justice, proving that anyone, regardless of status, can be used for God's greater purpose. Jael could have ignored Sisera. She could have stayed out of the conflict. She could have let someone else deal with him. But she didn't. She took initiative, seizing the moment when history was in her hands. This teaches an important truth. Great victories often come from decisive action. Too many times, opportunities pass by because people hesitate, fear failure, or assume someone else will step up. But Jael's story is proof that boldness leads to triumph. When the moment comes, step forward. Do what needs to be done. For 20 years, Sisera ruled over Israel with violence and oppression. His forces crushed villages, enslaved families, and tore apart the land. Victory seemed impossible, and many Israelites likely wondered if justice would ever come. But it did. It came at the right time. It came in an unexpected way. It came through someone no one anticipated. Justice is often delayed, but it is never denied. The Bible continually assures us. For the Lord loves justice and does not forsake his saints. Psalm 37 verse 28. Sisera's reign was long, but it was not eternal. And in the end, his cruelty met its rightful end. Esther, a queen who risked her life to save her people. The story of Jael and Sisera is more than a historical account of war, it is a testament to courage, wisdom, and divine intervention. It is a reminder that victory does not always come from the strongest army, the sharpest sword, or the greatest warrior. Instead, sometimes, it comes from an unlikely hero, from a single defining moment, from an act of bravery that defies expectations. Jael was not a soldier. She was not a prophet. She was not a ruler. Yet, she became one of Israel's greatest legends. Her story holds timeless lessons that still resonate today, shaping how we view leadership, faith, and divine justice. When Sisera fled the battlefield, no one expected a woman living in a tent to be the one who would deliver the final blow to Israel's oppressor. Warriors like Barak had led the charge, soldiers had fought with swords, yet it was Jael's single act of bravery that ended the war. This teaches us that heroism is not confined to the battlefield. True courage is often found in unexpected places, through ordinary people who rise to extraordinary challenges. Whether in war or everyday life, the lesson remains the same. Courage is not about status, it's about action. Throughout the Bible, God chooses unlikely individuals to fulfill his plans. David, a young shepherd boy, defeated Goliath with a single stone. Moses, a man who feared public speaking, led Israel out of Egypt. Gideon, a man full of doubt, became the leader of a victorious army. And now, Jael, an ordinary woman, changed the course of Israel's history. The lesson here is clear: God does not look at human qualifications, he looks at faithfulness. Jael's moment of decisiveness and boldness made her a vessel for divine justice, proving that anyone, regardless of status, can be used for God's greater purpose. Jael could have ignored Sisera. She could have stayed out of the conflict. She could have let someone else deal with him. But she didn't. She took initiative, seizing the moment when history was in her hands. This teaches an important truth. Great victories often come from decisive action. Too many times, opportunities pass by because people hesitate, fear failure, or assume someone else will step up. But Jael's story is proof that boldness leads to triumph. When the moment comes, step forward. Do what needs to be done. For 20 years, Sisera ruled over Israel with violence and oppression. His forces crushed villages, enslaved families, and tore apart the land. Victory seemed impossible, and many Israelites likely wondered if justice would ever come. But it did. It came at the right time. It came in an unexpected way. It came through someone no one anticipated. Justice is often delayed, but it is never denied. The Bible continually assures us. For the Lord loves justice and does not forsake his saints. Psalm 37 verse 28. Sisera's reign was long, but it was not eternal. And in the end, his cruelty met its rightful end. Jael's victory was unique, not just because she was a woman, but because women in her time were not seen as warriors or leaders. Yet, in Scripture, we repeatedly see women playing critical roles in divine plans. Deborah, a prophetess who led Israel to victory. Esther, a queen who risked her life to save her people. Mary, a young woman chosen to bear the Son of God. Jael stands among them, proving that God empowers both men and women to fulfill his purposes. Her story isn't just about victory over Sisera, it's about breaking the expectations of what leadership, courage, and action look like. Jael's defining moment came in an instant. She didn't have time to plan or strategize.